Today on the 10-12 podcast, myself and Andy Mitz welcome Alison Renner and Matt Smith to the show. We're going to talk about TOD, why the Big 12 has an ESPN problem, of course, recap every game in the Big 12, and get to know Colorado a little bit better, and tiebreaker scenarios for the Big 12 championship game coming up.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome to the 10-12, the podcast that covers all 16 teams in the Big 12 Conference. We are the flagship show of the 10-12 Network. Find every show on the network at 1012network.com. And of course, we are partners with Sports Social, Europe's biggest sports podcast network. I'm your host, Phillip Slavin. Thank you for joining us today. I always was supposed to say on this Monday because that's when this episode drops, as it does every week. But maybe you're listening to it on Tuesday. Maybe you have other shows you listen to on a Monday. Whenever you're listening to this, however you're listening to it, thank you so much. Do us a favor, leave us 5 stars and a positive review. It really does help the show out. Like, I know every podcast host says that. We have to say it because it really does help the show a bunch. So whether it's Spotify or it's iTunes, if it's YouTube, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. We'd appreciate it. However you're listening, thank you so much. We got a lot to get to today. A lot to get to. Joining me, as he does every week, is a man who is very, very excited right now, and thrilled that his crazy prediction could actually come to pass. He is Andy Mitz, the host of the Rock Chalk podcast. Andy, how you doing, bud?
Yeah, you act like it's a crazy thing that had barely any chance of happening. I told you it's going to happen. I mean, come on. What's my record of predicting Kansas going to bowl games on this podcast? That's right.
50-50?
No, actually it's 2-0.
Sure.
The last 2 years.
Okay.
So
in the last 2 years, your record is
exactly.
Well, it's 1-0. It's 1-0 so far. It ain't 2-0 yet.
No. I'm talking about the first year that they went under Leipold, and then last season as well.
Well, okay. So last year was all right.
Yes, I know. Last year was pretty simple, but look, I was not saying that Kansas was going to make a bowl game before that. So
all right. Vibe Queen herself, JSJ, Jamie Sarah Johnson, out today. We will have someone filling in for her as soon as she can get here. And then Matt Smith, who covers Colorado on his YouTube channel, is going to join us for the back half of the show to talk about the Buffaloes. There is one other person that I want to mention today that we're going to talk about a lot. His name is TOD. TOD is not a person. TOD is turnover on downs. You're going to hear the term turnover on downs a lot in this show. A lot. Because the story of this weekend in the Big 12 was who can finish drives and reach the end zone and who can't. We're going to say it a lot. I just want to preface before we dive in. Also, before anyone else gets here, shout out to... I just dropped the name, man. Shout out to Ben Williams. I'm sorry. Don't you love doing this stuff live? Who reached out on in the DMs on our Twitter account at 1012 Network. Also at 1012 Network on Blue Sky, since it is now hopping and rolling. I like Blue Sky for a couple reasons. The biggest one is the starter pack thing is awesome. You go in, someone makes a starter pack, and you're like, here, just follow all these awesome accounts. So we made one with a bunch of Big 12 accounts to follow. If you're on Blue Sky, come find us. Okay, so he shared a fantastic site that breaks down all the tiebreaker scenarios for the Big 12 championship game. And for this purpose, there are 4 teams still in contention for this thing with 2 weeks left to go. BYU, Colorado, Arizona State, and Iowa State. Now, I've shared this on Twitter. I've shared it on Threads. I've shared it on Blue Sky. The link is there. Go play. If you're looking for championship game scenarios, yes, there is a real possibility that if everyone goes like 8-6, well, that's not 8-6. The point is, there's weird stuff possible if we get a bunch of weird outcomes next 2 weeks. Like super not actually going to happen scenarios. But let's play with the 4 teams that we feel strongest about. If the championship game was played today, it's BYU 1 seed, Colorado 2. Okay. So the question then becomes, how does Arizona State, how does Iowa State make the championship game? For Arizona State, just win out. It's that simple. If Arizona State wins their last 2 games against BYU and Houston, Arizona State is going to the championship game. Colorado wins out, they're there. It'd be Colorado, Arizona State. Now let's play with, let's say Arizona State and Iowa State win out. It'd be Colorado and Iowa State because of tiebreaker scenarios. Like the tiebreaker situations get real weird with this stuff. Let's say Arizona State, Iowa State, and Kansas win out. You'd have an Iowa State, Arizona State Big 12 championship game. This all leads me to the most ridiculous thing. We'll talk about week 13 coming up. But how in the world did the 2 biggest games of this coming weekend in the Big 12 Conference get scheduled for the exact same time? How is BYU Arizona State and Colorado Kansas both at 2:30 on Saturday? BYU Arizona State 2:30 on ESPN, Colorado Kansas 2:30 on Fox. This is egregious and awful. And I'm going to complain more about ESPN here in a little bit, but this is a travesty, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, I would understand it a little bit if they were both scheduled for like a 6 p.m. start, because, you know, that's technically prime time. That's where most, you know, teams actually want to be. That at least kind of would have made sense. But the fact that you have them both there in that window, I mean, I guess I kind of understand that that's where the Big 12 gets relegated to, right? Their marquee stuff is in the 11 or the 2:30 slots. But yeah, no, this really sucks, right? That I'm not going to be able to watch the BYU Arizona State game unless I'm, you know, doing it while I'm covering Kansas, Colorado. So
there's 5 games at the same time. Arizona TCU's at 2, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, BYU Arizona State, Colorado Kansas, and UCF West Virginia are all at 2:30. Why is UCF West Virginia not at 11 a.m.? Just put UCF West Virginia at 11 o'clock. There's a 6 o'clock for Houston Baylor, a 6:30 for Utah hosting Iowa State, and a 7 o'clock for Kansas State Cincinnati. There's no late game. There's no 11 a.m. game. So all the games are cram-packed into essentially 2 windows. You have 8 games crammed into 2 windows. That don't make no sense. I don't understand it. I think I do.
And it's not like it's the final week. Like in the final week, that would potentially make sense, right? Is so that you're not having teams that are reliant on other teams doing something to still be in contention to just take off games or whatever. Not that that really happens nearly as much in college as it does in the pros, but I do at least see an argument for it in the last week where those sorts of things can have real impacts on whether you play starters or whether you play certain people. But yeah, I don't understand it. I mean, and this has been a complaint all year long, right? With the Big 12 scheduling. I understand that the TV, you know, networks are very, very involved in determining what times, but I feel like there's got to be something the conference can do to avoid having so many games on at the exact same time, because it just cannibalizes the exposure for those teams.
I was going to say this. I'm going to do this now. I'm blaming ESPN because the Big 12 has an ESPN problem. The Big 12 has a major, major ESPN problem. 2 things happened on Saturday that really grind my gears. I'm making a joke here, but seriously. You start the day on College Game Day. Desmond Howard questions, why are we even picking Kansas State, Arizona State? Why is this on the lineup? It's on your network. It's an ESPN game between 2 teams who still are in contention for a conference title game. Why is this game on our network? I'm going to make a snappy, rude comment about Kansas State. What? And then you get to the end of the day, and Heather Dinich, who is the ESPN's this is how we want things to go in the playoff mouthpiece. She is. It's fine. Someone has to have that job. It's fine. It's her job. You end the day with her on SportsCenter saying BYU shouldn't get a top 4 seed even if they finish 11-1 and win a Big 12 title. Instead, it should go to Boise State. The complete and total Just disregard an insult that ESPN has for the Big 12 right now. I don't understand it. I do not understand it. You pay this conference money to be part of you, and this is how you're treating this conference? Like a second-class citizen? Is Yormark doing something to piss you off? Has Yormark done something? Has the conference done something to insult you in some way? That this is how you treat this conference? And we knew this stuff with BYU was coming. We knew as soon as BYU lost again, this is what was going to be. The narrative had been being set. We're talking about 3-win SEC teams should be in the playoff. Well, if Boise State this is ridiculous. It is insulting. And this conference has a massive PR problem. And it is ESPN's fault right now. And then you look at the way the schedule stacks up this weekend with all these games on at the same time. The Big 12 has an ESPN problem. There's nothing you can do about it. You're in bed with them. You're not going to fix it. You can go and complain and gripe, but they care way more about the ACC and the SEC than they do about you. Thank goodness for Fox caring about the Big 12 enough to keep going and sending Big Noon there, even if it is to Colorado games, and only Colorado games, but at least they're doing that, okay? But College Game Day hasn't been to a Big 12 game all season. Mind you, they have the Big 12. This Saturday will be its third time to go to Ohio State, to travel to Ohio State. They can't air games at Ohio State on ESPN, but they're sending College Game Day there for a third time this season. They had an awesome Week 0 College Game Day in Ireland. Makes a ton of sense. Since then, in order, SEC team, SEC team, SEC team, SEC team, SEC team, ACC Conference Realignment game, Ohio State game, SEC team. They went to Bloomington, Indiana. Awesome, cool, great. Ohio State game, SEC team, Ohio State game. Like, you're not even going to like the interesting stuff. You've just decided it's going to be SEC and Ohio State. You don't have Ohio State games, and you can't give the Big 12 one game? Because we got to go to Ohio State again. We haven't been there enough. We gotta get it back there. We gotta go back to. We gotta make them feel good, so maybe they'll come back to us next time around. What? 4 Big 10 games have gotten College Game Day. You can't air any of their games. But sure, why not?
Yeah, I mean, kind of to your point, this weekend would have been a perfect time for a BYU versus Arizona State.
Yes. It's a huge game.
Right. It's a huge game. It's, it very well may decide who actually goes through the conference championship. It is 2 very, very good teams. Honestly, it's a travesty that Arizona State is not ranked right now. Unless they just jumped in the rankings and ESPN hasn't updated yet, which I wouldn't be shocked. But I mean, it's not the first time this year that there's been a Big 12 game that was good enough to be on there, and they went to some random, SEC team, or like you said, Ohio State. Like it used to be that the entire point of having those shows was that you would go to a place where you were then broadcasting. Like when College Game Day first started, the idea was whichever game was being showcased in prime time on ESPN, that's typically where they would go, unless there was a really compelling reason to not go there. And so that's, that was the way it was for the longest time. Now it's which SEC game can we go to? Which other game? Like it at least made sense when the idea was to have it be games that you're then leading into, right? So you have the show and then immediately go to that game's broadcast. That makes sense to me. But it doesn't make sense to me, you're like you said, to go to a place where you cannot broadcast. You can't be involved in the actual game itself. You are essentially hyping up a competitor's product because you want to be there at the quote unquote biggest games.
Well, and look, they air the playoff. They air the playoff show. And so they're not going to completely ignore the Big 10. I understand that. Right. That's fine. You've been to Ohio State 3 times. This is the 3rd time this Saturday you will go to Ohio State. It's not like they mixed it up with Big 10 games. They've gone to Ohio State 3 times. That is ridiculous. It also tells you just how top heavy the Big 10 actually is, and it makes no sense that they all get the money they get, but whatever. The Big 12 has an ESPN problem. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what the solution is. I'm not in those rooms having those conversations, but I'm putting the emphasis on Brett Yormark right now. Like, you have to figure out what's going on because this is unsustainable. Okay? This is unsustainable because The bigger issue here overall is, yes, Fox has taken Big Noon to Big 12 games when Deion Sanders is involved. What happens when Deion Sanders leaves Colorado? Is Big Noon going to still going to go back to Big 12 games? Are we going to get some Big 12 Big Noon, or are we going to see no representation for the Big 12 in this stuff at all? It's a problem. It's a problem. It absolutely is, because it's helping build the narrative of the Big 12 doesn't matter and the Big 12 is not any good. Like, this plays into that narrative, and that helps the Big 12 be excluded from conversations that they should be a part of and deserve to be a part of. And the fact that BYU keeps getting treated this way, like, at what point do we just accept that this is a good team? Nope. But we've been waiting for them to lose the whole year. They finally did, and that just proved that they were not as good as we thought they were. Like, that's all this is. It's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I just, ugh.
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating. But
right, we got to recap games.
Yes,
we got to get through this. Let's roll through these as best we can. Kansas 17, BYU 13. The Kansas Screws the Big 12 tour continued on Saturday, handing BYU their first loss of the season. Kansas winning this game isn't the most shocking thing. It's that they won 17-13. This game had high scoring written all over it.
Oh, yeah.
BYU had 5 drives, reached the Kansas 30-yard line, and came away with 13 total points from those. Kansas 10, field goal. Kansas 30, touchdown. Kansas 5, interception. Kansas 17, field goal. Kansas 16, turnover on downs. There's TOD. BYU had a 10-minute and 26-second drive that went 66 yards and ended with a 35-yard field goal. First of all, that's the kind of thing that's like Army's wet dream, is a 10-minute, 26-second drive, except they would prefer to turn that into a touchdown as opposed to a field goal. You are going to notice this point a lot today. The story of the weekend is teams who finished drives versus teams who didn't. I said that earlier. Now I'm saying it again because it's in my notes. Also, if I understand Parker's did we really get beat bad graphics correctly, I have a feeling that BYU fans are not going to want to look at it on Monday when it drops.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, because if you look at the way that game played out, yeah, I mean, outside of that one BYU drive, it was fairly even, like up and down the entire game. I think Kansas had a lot of big plays on the defense, and honestly, I think the big story out of this one is, like, we knew that BYU had a good defense, right? Like, we've talked about it, a great defense, a defense that has kept them in games. We weren't sure about Kansas. Like, Kansas has played an Iowa State team that was struggling, a Kansas State team that for some reason now their offense can't seem to get much going. And I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a few, but like all of the big opportunities the Kansas defense had, like every single time there was but like something's going on. Like you can be excused for not completely buying into that defense. I think that this game kind of changes that. BYU is a team that has been very successful on offense. And yes, Utah, as people can continually remind us, Utah, the number one defense in the Big 12, kind of shut BYU down a little bit last week or the week before. But, this is a BYU team that has been able to score big amount of points, especially in Big 12 play. And Kansas was able to shut them down at home. Like, that's, I think, the biggest issue, or the biggest selling point here, is that Kansas was able to come up with big plays on defense to win them a game, as opposed to relying on the offense to go and, score a crazy 70-yard touchdown.
Yeah, I'm not going to say shut them down. I'm going to say kept them out of the end zone. Because again, if you have that 5 drives that all reach the scoring zone, which is the 30 or closer, like, that's not shutting a team down. That's just you stopped them when you absolutely had to. And Kansas benefited. You scored 17 points, and 7 of those came off of a muffed punt that then turned into 7.
Oh, yeah,
so
for
like,
sure.
BYU's made mistakes more than Kansas, and it caught up with them in a game that was low scoring, surprisingly. So
this game continued trends, right? Kansas had forced 8 turnovers coming into this game in the last 4 games, and had only committed 2. BYU, I believe I went back and counted it. I think they had given up 6 turnovers coming into the game, and had only gotten 4, I believe it was. So like, BYU was losing the turnover battle in the recent games, whereas Kansas was winning it. And that's ultimately what you saw being the difference, was turnovers.
Arizona State 24, Kansas State 14. Like I said, the story of the weekend is teams who finished drives versus teams who didn't. Kansas State's drive chart is as follows for the start of this game. Before they scored their first touchdown. Interception on second play. Turnover and downs at their own 47. Punt. Fumble at their own 40. Turnover on downs at the Arizona State 6. Punt. Then they scored a touchdown. Then they scored their first points of the game, which did not come until there was 2:51 left in the third quarter. I wasn't as high on Kansas State as most. But this is still a disappointing season for the Wildcats. Like, it just is. Like, you've got 3 losses now. 2 of them, one at home to Arizona State where you were shut out till almost the fourth quarter. One to Houston, who's, I mean, like, snappy and fun and whatever, but, like, they're not great. And you got blasted by BYU and Provo. Like, you can forgive one of these losses. You might be able to forgive 2. The 3 of them combined in the way they were with the way the offense sputtered in those games and made mistakes. Like, again, I didn't want to be too high on Kansas State because of what they had lost. But this is still disappointing for Kansas State. And I know it is. But I still think their future is very bright because it's the start of a rebuilding period for Kansas State. Arizona State, as we mentioned, controlled its own destiny. Look, went out and you're in. Went out and basically you're in. Now, there is a scenario where they went out and it's Colorado, Iowa State. If Kansas beats Colorado, Iowa State wins out and Arizona State wins out, then it's Colorado, Iowa State. So that to some extent, they don't control their destiny. They really would like Colorado to win because that would help them out a lot. But just go win your last 2 games. I said the wrong teams. It's BYU at home next weekend in a massive game, and then a road game in Arizona, who, congratulations, Arizona, on ending your 5-game losing streak. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think this game, like you said, like you could chalk up the loss to BYU to Provo at night. You know, being weird. Like, we talked about that going into that game, about that being a possibility. Although, obviously, the final margin was a little weird. You can chalk up the Houston game potentially to the abysmal weather that they had and the offense just not able to get going. But then to get completely shut down by this Arizona State team at home. Like, I think that's the biggest issue, is that this was
off of an idle week.
Right.
Off of an idle week.
Right.
Which is usually a spot where Coach Kleiman at Kansas State flourishes.
Well, and you get healthier. You have, more time to game plan for everything. Like, yes, there was literally no excuse for the way that this game went. I heard the announcers talking a whole lot about how it looks like Avery Johnson is playing with some sort of injury or just doesn't have. But to be honest, like, I don't know that I see that much. Like, if that's the case, then it's something that's been persisting for a few weeks, because he played extremely similarly to how he played against Kansas and how he played against Houston in this game against Arizona State. They just, weren't completely shut down in those games. At least not like this.
Finishing drive, turnover on downs. Iowa State 34, Cincinnati 17. This game was closer than the final score indicated, but the biggest takeaway here is that Iowa State bounced back from 2 tough losses to keep themselves in the Big 12 title game race. As we mentioned, Cincinnati scored a touchdown with 11:44 left to cut Iowa State's lead to 20-17. But the Cyclones ate up 9 minutes and 41 seconds of the remaining game clock in 2 touchdown drives to put this one away. Cincinnati, the fear for Cincinnati, and I don't remember if Chase said it on the podcast after they lost to West Virginia, or if he said it just to me personally, or maybe it wasn't Chase. No, I think it was Parker. I think Parker said it. I don't remember. Somebody said after they lost it's going to stink that they may end up missing a bowl game. Cincinnati's 5-5. They go to Kansas State and they get TCU left. Like, it'd be really tough to be sitting there at 5-2 and then completely whiff and miss a bowl. I'm not going to say that they're going to finish this season on a 5-game losing streak, but it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility. And of course, as we mentioned already, Iowa State, just win, baby. That's all you can do. You need other people to pull off upsets, other teams to lose. You need other dominoes to fall. But for you to make it to Arlington, the one thing you can control, win.
Yep. Yeah. This game, like you said, this was one that Iowa State fans and kind of me watching this as in the lead up to the Kansas game, I was a little worried. Like this looked like it was a Cincinnati was coming back, was going to really be able to make this one an issue down the stretch. And Iowa State was finally able to string together a very long drive that they just hadn't been able to do. This is an Iowa State team that I think what we've seen is that they get better as the game goes on. The real question is just how much better are they actually getting? This was a game where all of a sudden things kind of turned and they were able to control the ball a lot better than they had been. And it finally worked out. The problem becomes, can they do that against the rest of the teams on their schedule?
We shall see. Joining us now, I said we would have someone replacing Jamie tonight, and she is here. She is the 1012 Network's official rules official and friend of the pod, Alison Renner. Alison, welcome back.
Hello. Sorry for my lateness. The Chiefs just got done playing a bit ago, so I've been disappointed twice this weekend so far.
Ooh,
yeah.
Tough, Alison.
That was a rough game to watch, but
yeah,
that's all right. We get to talk Big 12 football. So
feuding with a website, and man, you got a lot on your plate right now. A lot on your plate.
The Big 12 is honestly my maybe third thing I'm upset about this week, so it's fine. We'll settle for that.
All right. Let's pick up on our run through. Baylor 49, West Virginia 35. Dave Aranda is officially returning for 2025. No shocker there. Reaching bowl eligibility was a big part. We said this on the podcast multiple times the last few weeks. If he reached a bowl game, he was coming back in large part due to everything that's going on with college sports right now. But the Baylor offensive resurgence has to have also played a big part to me. You have to be optimistic not only about the rest of this season, but going into next season with the way that Sawyer Robertson has played at quarterback for them and the way this offense has looked. Can you imagine if they'd have just, figured out he was the right quarterback before the season? Might have been a big thing for Baylor. Not to play Monday morning quarterback here, but you have to wonder if West Virginia should have kicked field goals on a couple of those drives where they chose not to. In the second quarter, with the game tied at 14, all West Virginia ended a promising drive with a TOD, turnover on downs, at Baylor 35. Again, in the third, West Virginia down just 7 points. A promising drive ends with a turnover on downs, hey Todd, at the Baylor 9. Same thing on West Virginia's following drive, still down just 7. Todd rears his ugly head again, that jerk Todd, at the Baylor 35. And then the game just got away from them for there. Baylor finished drives, West Virginia did not. Story of the weekend. That's why the Bears are bowl eligible and the Mountaineers are still looking for that 6th win with 2 games to go.
Yeah, this was a disappointing game if you're a Mountaineers fan. Like, this looked like it was one that they were going to be competitive in. But honestly, I think the biggest shocker for me for this one was that they basically hit the over in the first half. Or I think they actually got to the over like before the first half. Halftime. It was ridiculous. I was not expecting a scorer fest like that in the first half. And then they get to the second half and nobody can score in the third quarter. And I'm just like, wait a minute, like what is going on? Obviously the going for it in situations that you probably shouldn't have gone for it had a lot to do with that. But I still think that this was a little surprising to see such prolific offense. It reminds me a lot of, actually, I think it was these two teams last year, wasn't it? Or 2 years ago, West Virginia and Baylor as well, where they had a blowout it was a back and forth game in the first half. And then the second half, all of a sudden nobody could score again. So I don't know. This seems to be a recurring thing with West Virginia teams where they will have what looks to be a promising first half. And then the second half is just, who knows what's going on here.
Yeah, and to your point about kicking field goals, lack of, I guess, instead of just going for the touchdown, I wonder if that's just more of a confidence issue. And it's not lack of confidence in the kickers, it's just confidence that you're actually going to be able to get the points later on. I feel like in the first half, especially, you need to be taking the easy points. Especially when you're not down by much, instead of going for the win in the first half. So I'm not really sure about the decision making there. I think that just kick the field goal when it's the easy decision, and don't try to, pull out anything crazy when it's really early on in the game. And we'll see.
Yeah, this felt a lot like it was hey, we're not going to be able to win this game by just kicking field goals, so we're going to go for it in situations that you probably don't necessarily need to go for it that early.
Congratulations to Baylor on their first ever win in Morgantown, West Virginia, which is it sounds like a wild stat, but they only started playing each other when West Virginia joined the Big 12, so it's not like it's a long historic history of not winning there. Arizona 27, Houston 3. Houston's bad offense returned, 3 turnovers. Arizona's kicker made field goals of 62 and 51 yards, and they were both comfortably through the uprights. The 62-yarder had room to spare. Good grief. Houston failed to score points on the following drives. Arizona 33, Todd. Arizona 1, Todd. Arizona 31, field goal. Arizona 27, Todd. Arizona 22, fumble. Todd was everywhere in the Big 12 this weekend, folks. All over the place. He was very, very, very busy. I don't think we need to elaborate on this game all that much. Houston is Houston now officially eliminated from bowl contention? No, they have to win out though.
Right, they both have to finish out. By the way, the other notable stat here as well is that Arizona was not immune from visits from Todd, because they went and they actually, right before Houston scored their one field goal of the game, they turned it over on downs as well. So this is to be honest, this was the kind of ugly game I think that we've come to expect from these two teams. I have no idea what to think about this Houston team. It's the second year in a row that I don't know what to think about Houston at all.
It's year one of a rebuild.
Understandable, but still, like, you would think they either are going to be good or they're going to be not good. Not one week they feel like they could beat anybody, and the next week they feel like they could lose to anybody by a ton.
Solid defense, up and down offense that occasionally rears its really ugly head.
I do think that we see that kind of inconsistency with first-year coaches, though, especially taking over the talent pool that he has. I am very afraid of Willie Fritz in the future. I think that he's a great recruiter, and I think he's going to build a really good team. He obviously has K-State's number for some reason, and I think that they'll be pretty good contenders in the next couple of years, but it'll take a while to build that for sure.
Yeah, there was a reason that a lot of Kansas fans wanted Willie Fritz to take over instead of Lance Leipold. So obviously it's worked out well for the Jayhawks, but it was only a matter of time before Willie Fritz got to the Big 12 and started having some fun.
I won't play the Willie Fritz wins over Kansas State versus Kansas. I laugh that there's 2 weeks left in the regular season, and Oklahoma State's still the only team who's been officially been eliminated from bowl contention in the Big 12 conference. Speaking of Arizona, one quick note. I have to talk about the Wildcats lost to Wisconsin on Friday night in men's basketball for a minute. 103-88. That was the final score in college basketball. The two teams shot a combined 87 free throws. Wisconsin had a guy score 41 points because he went 21 of 22 from the free throw line. 63 combined fouls called in this game. What are we doing? I'm going to try and chalk this up to like, oh, we're trying new things in the beginning of the season, and so this is it. No. Don't. This better be the most free throws and fouls we see in a game this season, because gross.
I will say
nasty.
At Big 12 Media Days that the Big 12 referee liaison did mention that, hey, they are emphasizing the fouls a lot more at the beginning of the season, and that you should expect these kind of growing pains early in the year. I don't think anyone expected it this bad, though.
I swear they said that last season too. And I remember at the beginning of last season, the fouls were so excessive. And then it felt like throughout the season, they kind of maybe gave up a little bit. I have a hard time believing that's players changing their style of play. I think that they just kind of stopped caring as much. But I don't know. I haven't looked at the other conferences to see what their foul rates are or how much they're calling things. I have a good friend who is a referee, and she's educated me to become the rules official of the Big 12 for the 10-12 network. But I don't know. I hope to God I don't have to hear a whistle every 2 seconds in a Big 12 basketball game this year.
Get this out of your system. Also, yeah, every year it's like, we're going to call more fouls early. And just try and just do a good job. Can we just do that? Just do a good job. Okay. Stop trying to just try and do a good job. Okay. Speaking of doing a good job, Charlie Hustle, official sponsor here on the 1012 podcast and the 1012 network as a whole, does a great job of supplying every single Big 12 fan with incredible vintage-inspired collegiate apparel. T-shirts, sweaters, hoodies, sweats, whatever you need, they've got it. And it's going to look awesome. Whether it's on you for the rest of this football season, the start of basketball season, or it's something you're putting in a box and wrapping to stick under the tree because Christmas is almost here. Don't wait till the 23rd. So go to charliehustle.com. They've got stuff for all 16 Big 12 teams. Incredibly comfortable gear. Look, it's not always comfortable going to games. Sometimes it's hot. Sometimes it's cold. Sometimes there's a drunk guy yelling behind you in your ears. Sometimes there's some rowdy college kids who are literally bumping into you constantly. The one thing that you won't feel bad about is the t-shirt, sweater, or hoodie that you're wearing, and just kind of close your eyes and just enjoy the feeling of it on you and say, this is a nice place. I am in a safe space right now. So go to charliehustle.com, promo code 101215. Get you 15% off all non-sale items. If it's on sale, don't need to worry about it. Throw it in the cart and enjoy. But if it's not on sale, TEN1215, 15% off all non-sale items. Charlie Hustle, vintage made fresh.
Phillip, I feel like those stories about fan experiences were a little personal.
I feel like I speak for all fans who have experienced who knows how many different occurrences at live sporting events. And those are the most generic I could come up with. So let's see. I got yelled at by a Kansas fan wearing, I don't know, some like KU suit of armory looking thing one time when I went for the OSU game because I was standing and he was mad. And I was like, okay, there's not enough people here to be mad that I'm still standing.
I definitely also know that one of those references was to a certain Bedlam game, right? Anyway,
I've been to one Bedlam football game in my life, and the OU fan disappeared. Can't imagine why.
Never to be seen again. No.
Never to be. Don't know where that guy went. He never returned to his seat. I'm not sure what happened. All right. Allison, if you want to stick around since you hopped in late, we'll go ahead and keep you here. Joining us also now, it's time to talk a little bit of Colorado Buffaloes, okay? This is a team that we all had expectations for, which, like many Big 12 teams this year, because the top five in the standings now is not any of the teams we had in the top five in the preseason poll. C'est la vie. But Colorado sits here, went out, and you are going to Arlington. And so we're very excited to welcome Matt Smith, who covers the Colorado Buffaloes. Great stuff on YouTube. Matt, welcome to the 1012, sir.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing well, man. I'm excited. I'm excited to talk a little Colorado football because, look, I think people have gotten tired of Colorado. I think Colorado's pushed on college football fans a lot last year, and then the team didn't deliver from a wins and losses standpoint to feel like they deserved it. A lot of different thoughts and feelings on Deion Sanders. He was a hot topic to discuss ad nauseum. And now this year, Deion's been a bit quieter. The team's winning. They sit in a great spot to get to Arlington. And yes, Fox has gone there to take Big Noon to Colorado games multiple times this season, and deservedly so, and we get why, and that's awesome. But it's just interesting to me that as soon as this team started winning, people just, I don't know if it's just people weren't as interested anymore, or they just got burnt out on Colorado. But here we sit with a Colorado team who is, good. This is a good football team. They're a fun football team to watch. Shedeur is awesome, and Travis Hunter is, otherworldly. What happened, man? Like, what happened this offseason to go from what we saw last year to what we see now, and for most of us just be as wrong as we were about this team?
Well, look, I think you kind of have to go back to the start of last year. When Prime came in, it was after the Celebration Bowl. He stayed at Jackson until the end of it. So, they had feelers in, and they had people already in the building working up until that point. But it's different when, the guy in charge arrives. And so they got a little bit of a later jump on some of the recruiting and some of the coaching hiring. And, they had to prove that they were capable and at least had something tangible, and they did with Shedeur and Travis. And so they built around that last year. You have to remember, again, when he took over the program, they lost 11 games by an average margin of 29.5. Not only were they not competitive, most of those players shouldn't have been on the field at the Power Five level, which turned out to be true because a lot of them aren't anymore. So he had to really purge the whole thing and start from scratch. And so I think he did a good job last year in filling out some positions, the skill positions he was able to attract, because obviously he has that appeal. And then, obviously, I think the trenches were harder because they needed to prove that they were going to do some winning or had something to block for, or there was something there to convince legitimate offensive line talent to come in. And obviously, that is Shedeur and Travis. And then they got Jordan Seaton, who was the number one offensive tackle in the country coming out of high school last year, which was a massive get. He'll be a freshman All-American and maybe an honorable mention for the All-American team. That was a big part of it, right? You had to rebuild that offensive line. So you guys got to remember now, they jettisoned about 90%, maybe a little bit more of their roster in 23. And then this year they took on 46 more new transfers. So you have to think that's over like 120 new kids cycled in the program and the same numbers going out. And not only did you have the personnel, you had more talent. The players they went and got out of the portal, they weren't sitting next to Alabama's water boy. They were actually getting snaps on the field. You had Power 5 players. Chidozie Nwankwo coming from Houston has made a huge difference in the middle of that defensive line. So it was the talent that you were getting. You weren't just getting backups. You were getting guys who were actually contributors at some level at the Power 5. And so it was a different caliber of transfer. Not to mention, you started to get more high-profile freshmen. Draylon Miller, we just saw him have a huge game on Saturday. 100 yards, first 100-yard game, and a really nice touchdown. Guys like that who are ready to play right away. But then you have to look at what he did with the coaching staff, right? Because I think there was a feeling out period because you didn't have the pick of the litter when you came in. And so he did the best he could. And I think there were some things he wanted to do that turned out, well, maybe at this level, we should maybe do it a different way, which is why you saw Pat Shurmur come in, and then eventually he got promoted last year as Sean Lewis got demoted. And right now you've got a staff that you have to give Coach Prime a lot of credit because Robert Livingston, he got from Cincinnati to be their defensive coordinator. He was the DB's coach, safeties coach with the Bengals for 9 years. And when he got hired, we all went, huh? We all went, who? Robert Livingston. And I mean, that's a huge gamble because they have to win this year. So to go get a first-time play caller, you are taking a chance. And Livingston has just turned out to be a superstar in the making. He'll be a finalist for the Broyles Award, I imagine, given to the top assistant every year. They've lopped off almost 11 points off their average allowed to opponents this year. And then not to mention, you get the talent, you get the camaraderie with the coaching staff. Warren Sapp gets brought in. There's life and juice in the coaching staff. And I think the camaraderie top to bottom, and not to mention, guys, this is how I describe it. This is really what happened. The first two games of the season, right? North Dakota State, Nebraska, I call it the come to Jesus moments that, okay, we have to start doing things differently. We have to start running the football in this program. We've got to commit to it because there's just way too much pressure on Shedeur's shoulders. The offensive line, is it better? Yeah, it's better, but it's not your strength. And so you have to scheme around it, which is where Pat Shurmur's experience kind of comes into play. So you had those epiphanies. And then the next 3 weeks, CSU, Baylor, UCF, that was about proving that you should be taken seriously and that you can make those adjustments. And they did. They made just about every adjustment that they needed to make. They started handling games a lot better. And I think they just started to put players in better positions to succeed as they started to learn their roster. Because remember, there were 46 new players implemented this year. There was a little bit of a weeding out factor there. And so they proved that they should be taken seriously, especially with a bit of an exclamation point on that little chapter of the season when they went and beat Central Florida the way they did so convincingly on the road. That was a huge step for this program. And then the next 3 weeks were about proving you could be a legitimate contender for the Big 12. They should have beaten Kansas State. Sorry, Allison. That was a really close game at the end. And I think that as the season has progressed, I would say that's kind of sorted itself out a little bit, especially with the way that Kansas State played the other night. However, you then, go to the wire with them, and that's a program that traditionally would run right over you, considering how they'd played over the better part of the last 2 decades. Then you win at Arizona convincingly. You beat Cincinnati at home, prove you should be taken seriously, and now you prove you're a contender. And now this last stretch here is about proving you can win it. So I have to give them so much credit. All the questions that we had, guys, could they protect Shedeur last year? He was the most sacked, most pressured, most hurried quarterback in the country, right? He was running for his life and put up the numbers they did. They're better at that. The scheme is better to do that. They're getting the ball out quicker. Yeah, he's still holding on to it occasionally, but he's much better than he was last year. Not to mention, could you stop the run? They were what, like a bottom 10 rushing defense in FBS last year? Look at what they did to Utah. They just held a program that's perennially phenomenal on the ground to their worst rushing grade per PFF since 2016. Ironically, the game that Colorado beat Utah to win the Pac-12 South at Folsom, kind of a little, stars aligning moment there, kind of just because we haven't seen a lot of this success since 2016. So I would say the biggest transitions are they're getting more comfortable. They have more resources now, and you probably have the best two players in the country, in my opinion.
Yeah, I will say coming into the year, I mean, my synopsis of Colorado was essentially, look, they made a ton of changes on the offense and defensive lines. If those work out, they're going to be a really good team. If they don't work out, they're going to be a really awful team like we saw the year before. And I was wrong about which one I thought it was going to be. I didn't think that their lines were going to make this big of a jump. But I think you're right. Like kind of to your point, all the other pieces were there. It was all about line play. And being a Kansas fan, I know how badly bad offensive line play can just tank an offense, no matter how talented everything else is. And I think that's kind of what we saw last year. This year, they have it's not a phenomenal offensive line, but it's definitely much, like above average and doing absolutely everything that you need it to do for a guy like Shedeur.
Yeah, again, I think a lot of it has to do with scheme as well, too. That was kind of where they ran into some issues against Utah in the first half. You saw a lot of route concepts that took a while to develop. And traditionally, especially against a defensive front that kind of throws that many different looks at you, the chess match that was going on yesterday between Shedeur and that front seven was fun as hell to watch. I mean, Shedeur is such a high IQ guy. As far as quarterbacks I've ever been around, he probably reads a defense better than anybody I've ever been around, which is probably the reason why he's going to be the first quarterback off the board. I'm so high on what he could do at the pro level. I think when you take what you've seen of him at Colorado and then put him around professionals, I think he's going to be a hell of a pro. I really do. But again, I think it's about scheme too. If they were asking him to sit back there, throw 45 times a game and constantly sit in 10 personnel like they did last year, it would be a problem. But they're using more 11 this year. You got to remember, they didn't even have a tight end on last year's team, guys. The guy who was playing tight end was a converted walk-on receiver. So you have to understand, like, the pieces weren't there. And I think the way that Coach Prime came in and had to set the standard, okay, we are taking things seriously. We are about winning here. And to everyone around the country, like you just mentioned, Phillip, everybody kind of got fatigued because, you say that and then you're not backing it up on the field. We don't really want to hear from you as casual fans because there's nothing to point to of where we can justify, hey, you want to win? Well, show us, right? Despite the fact that they didn't really get blown out but twice last year, really, Oregon and Washington State, and Shedeur got sacked 4 times the first 10 snaps in that game. So, yeah, they've upgraded that. They protected him better. And guys, obviously you got to run the football. They haven't really done that the last 2 weeks and scored 90 points, but in 4 of the previous 6, they eclipsed 100 yards, which I have said all year long, the litmus test for this Colorado team, if you can get to 120 rushing yards, they win every game. Because that means Shedeur's not getting sacked. And if Colorado's rushing the ball for 120 yards, what do you think Shedeur's throwing for? Because nobody's slowing him down yet. So we'll see what happens here moving forward. But yes, the ability to protect the quarterback and stop the run, Coach Prime talks about those are 2 goals every week. And, certainly I would say last week, or at least on yesterday, they were able to accomplish that.
So I don't agree with a lot of things that Colorado does culture-wise, coaching-wise, but what I really do respect with their team is, like you mentioned, the ability to adapt to what their team needs and being able to work with the turnover that they've had and figure out where their talent is and kind of scheme to that. So we talk a lot about how Colorado runs a pro-style offense, that a lot of these guys playing on this team are, aspiring to be in the NFL. Shedeur, hopefully being one of them as a early draft pick. My concern is, what's the longevity of that with Colorado? We're already talking about Dion possibly moving into the NFL in the near future. When Shador leaves, do you expect him to kind of stay for Shiloh until he graduates? Do you expect that it has anything to do with his kids at all being on the team? Or how long do you think that the Dion Sanders kind of era will stay at Colorado? Do you think he's going to continue to coach in the college level or move on to the professional?
He'll be here. Yeah, he'll be here. He's not interested in going into the NFL. From everything that he's told us, that he feels like he could not coach around guys that don't take it as seriously as he did and are making the types of money that people are making, these days. And, I'm not exactly sure that his style would be the best for the NFL either, because he wants to help young people. That's his calling. And again, culturally, I think they're doing a phenomenal job. I think a lot of that stuff that you referenced there are kind of false narratives that are brought up, or only things that are seen during games, because a lot of people see that and they go, "Oh, well, that's who Shador is. He's flashy." You have to remember who Deion Sanders was when he came up. He was a cultural icon, a pop cultural icon. There is a significant part of this where they are light years ahead of everybody from a branding perspective. And because they're backing it up on the field, now you don't really hear a lot of that anymore, because, hey, it's working. They're winning. They can handle it. They just didn't have enough around them. So, yeah, he'll be here. Shiloh will go to the NFL this year, or at least to the draft this year. We'll see if he gets drafted. I imagine he'll at least get an undrafted opportunity, go to training camp at some point, somewhere. What I would say though is that, he's the older brother, so they all are out of eligibility essentially. They all exhausted it. And if you're looking at the recruiting class that they're bringing in right now, they're getting crystal balled to land the, number 2 overall player in the country in Juju Lewis, who reclassified to 2025 per ESPN. So, you bring him in. The IMG pipeline that they're developing, the amount of IMG Academy guys they had in this weekend was phenomenal. I mean, they had multiple 5-stars. They had Michael Carroll, who's I think 74th overall in ESPN's 300, and Nathaniel Owosu Boateng, who's a 5-star linebacker. So yeah, I think there's real roots here. Now, to your point, it was a microwave process the last 2 years, right? Like, they weren't trying to go into the high school ranks and bring in a bunch of 18-year-olds, because you're trying to win now. That's not the most efficient way to win right now. They are going to go through a bit of a reset, but the place that they're resetting from is the floor is so much higher than where it was before. I mean, guys, the last time they brought in a 5-star before Jordan Seaton and Shador and Travis, I mean, it had been like since 2004 or 5. So it's just all about a building a program here. And, they are really, I think they're really doing a great job, because, I think, well, a lot of people see the confidence that they have. They take it one way, but truthfully, it is everything that I think Colorado fans could have ever asked for and more, quite frankly. So I think everybody here is just overwhelmed with what they've done in such a short period of time, especially, again, from where they came from.
Okay, so normally we just look at the games coming the weekend, but since we have you, Matt, and we have Andy here, and honestly, one of the 2 biggest games in the Big 12 this weekend is Colorado at Kansas. I want to ask you both, how does your team win? What does Kansas do, Andy, for them to win on Saturday? What does Colorado do, Matt, for them to win? Andy, I'm going to let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, it's as much as people say that Kansas does not have a home field advantage anymore because they're in Children's Mercy, or I'm sorry, or they're in Arrowhead. Like, this has been a team that has actually been very well supported when they're playing their quote unquote home games. And I mean, Kansas has played a lot better at home than they have on the road. And coming off of the game that they played against BYU, I think we saw what that looks like. You have an offense that is able to make big plays, that is able to get the running game going, that is able to do enough to kind of keep the opposing team kind of having to look at a bunch of different stuff. And to be honest, like, Kansas was a little bit hampered by the fact that Lawrence Arnold went out very early with an injury against BYU. If he's back, I think that's really helpful for the Jayhawks. Although last I heard, It was an ankle injury that was severe enough that they're concerned that he may not be available. But the Jayhawks will have some time to kind of adjust to that. Jalen Daniels will have some time to build some rapport with some of the other receivers. But I think really what it comes down to is that Kansas holds on to the ball, and they turn their defensive line loose. Like, yes, I think that, as you said, Colorado and the way that they scheme things has been a lot better this year. I don't know if Kansas is able to get the kind of pressure that they've been getting in the last 4 or 5 weeks. Colorado's not going to be able to hold them off the entire game. The question is going to be, as you get further and further in the game, is Kansas going to be able to stiffen up on defense and start getting those big stops and start putting pressure on the Colorado offense to have to try to do more? And once that happens, that's when guys like Melo Dotson, that's when guys like Kobe Bryant can really kind of pick their spots and decide where they're going to go for a big play and potentially try to put a game that way. So I think it really comes down to Jalen Daniels holding onto the ball, Kansas establishing the run game, and not going away from it as they get further down, as they get further towards the end of the game, and then the defense biding their time and looking for the opportunities to set up big plays.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I like that you bring up the pass rush, because one thing we saw from Utah, they may not have gotten to Shedeur officially on the stat sheet, as many times as others have. Only 3 sacks given up, but there was a lot of pressure. There was, and I didn't think the game plan was great, to be honest with you, for Utah. There was way too much. They were looking down the field way too much, and I think that they're at their best when they're using a scalpel and not a hammer. And this will, I think, probably be the biggest test as far as as you brought up with Dodson and Bryant. Outside, it's going to be fun to watch Shedeur go against 2 NFL corners. The one thing I did see, actually, Chris Harris Jr., Kansas legend, right, and Bronco legend for us here in Colorado. He put out, it'll be fun to watch Travis go up against those 2 guys. And, I think it'll be interesting. You might see a lot of man coverage for Travis. And quite frankly, we'll see how that goes. It just hasn't gone well for many people offensively against Travis. Guys, he's, you could think about whatever you want to about the program, but as somebody who has covered every professional sport, NBA, NHL, NFL, I never see anything like this young man. He is just unbelievable. It's like the athletic ability that he possesses. I've said that, I've got high respect for Nathan McKinnon, who was the NHL MVP last year, and he's known for his just unbelievable endurance. Travis is the most impressive team sport cardiovascular athlete I've ever seen. Like, the guy will play 170 snaps, come into the post game and be bone dry. That line in Seinfeld where George takes a shower, comes out, and he says it didn't take because he's still sweaty going back to the office. Travis has never had one of those days. So, I think it'll be great to see that type of a challenge. We didn't really get to see much of a challenge at Arizona against Teteroa McMillan because Travis pretty much shut him down. They did all together. So you're right. It's all about, for me, for Kansas, Jalen Daniels. You can't let him get rolling early. If he starts to get rolling early, then I think you're going to have a shootout. For Colorado, it's all going to be about their ability to get back to running the football. They know they need to. The last 2 weeks have been well below what they had shown for a good chunk of the season. So if they're able to do that, I don't think Kansas will be able to get sustained pressure for 4 quarters. And to be honest with you, Shedeur's been dealing with sustained pressure for 4 quarters now for 2 years, running for his life for the most part. I mean, he's still up there as far as, I'm not exactly sure if he's still the most sacked. He's got to be, though. He's got to be at least near the top. So the point is that, he has dealt with that. I think for Kansas, you brought it up. It's about their ability to get Colorado off the field on 3rd down. The Buffs have scored 90 points the last 2 weeks, and they're 5 of 24 on 3rd down. That's it's almost unbelievable if you think about it, that they've been able to do that while not being able to sustain drives. I believe they've had 11 scoring drives, and on 7 of those over the last 2 weeks, they never saw 3rd down. So it's about limiting their chunk plays. And again, I think if Kansas can find a way to just keep everything in front of you and sitting too high all day and make Shedeur throw into zone, he loves to get greedy. And we've seen, there have been some times this year where he's just done some things that are not characteristic. The first throw of the game the other day, I didn't even realize it was the first drive of the year that he's thrown an interception on, which is just, again, not indicative, but it kind of goes to, they do get just like a little too pass happy sometimes, where I'd like to see more drive starters instead of looks 20 yards down the field. And it has bitten them sometimes. So they're definitely struggling there. if they can get pressure at Kansas, then I think this is going to be a close game. But quite honestly, I don't think we've seen Colorado put it together for 4 quarters yet. And that's what's scary to me. They should have put up over 60 points on Utah yesterday, guys. Like that was, and that's the number 1 defense in the Big 12. So, whatever you think about Coach Prime or the program, you got to respect the team that's on the field right now. As Kyle Whittingham himself said yesterday, who I have more respect for as far as like from a coaching perspective than anyone in the Big 12, that they were far and away the best team that Utah had played this year. So that also being said with a caveat that had Utah had a better quarterback, I think that would have been a different game. And so that's where I say for Colorado, it's all about stopping the run, which they did last week against Utah. They only had 31 rushing yards. And if you do that, you make Jalen Daniels just have to beat you for 4 quarters. And I mean, he's a hell of a player. There's a reason why Kansas was picked near the top of the Big 12 by the media, right, guys? I mean, they won 9 games last year. And Colorado has a lot of respect. And so does Coach Prime. He told us the other night for Lance Leipold, he said that they constantly are exchanging text messages, and he'll be one of the guys that he calls. So great respect for both of these programs. It's been a shock to me to see Kansas, and the struggles that they've had this year. They're just getting killed in these 1-score games, which is why it was awesome to see him pull it out. I thought it was on Saturday night because I got some buddies that went to Kansas, so I was pulled for that program.
Yeah, I mean the one thing that I will say, because this is a Kansas team that does things I think a little weird in terms of the way that they let a game trend. Typically teams will have a decent amount of success against them in the first quarter, and then they'll kind of buckle down, especially defensively in that second quarter. Except for the last 2 minutes for whatever reason of the first half. But then what you really start to see in the second half is either the team establishes the run and starts to sustain drives, and then Kansas kind of has to hold on, or Kansas finds a way to completely shut them down. I don't think they're going to be able to shut down Colorado. But what I will say is that the one thing Kansas does that not a lot of other teams can do is they can legitimately bring pressure from almost every single position on the field. The corners can get back back there to rush a quarterback. You have linebackers and safeties that do it all the time. And the defensive line, they have 5 guys across that defensive line who have multiple sacks on the year. So like they have a lot of different guys that can do it, which causes a lot of confusion for teams. I think that's the big question for me is Colorado going to be able to scheme and recognize well enough with their offensive line to stop, because they give up a lot of big plays. They give up a lot of, sustained drives, but all they need is two big plays back to back to completely kill a drive, or to completely turn the tide of an entire game. That's really what this defense is. It's a bend all over the place, but don't break and then step up at the last minute when you really need to. It's burned them a few times, obviously this year, like we've seen. But I think that's kind of their best way to win is to really, I guess, find ways to be disruptive enough that it breaks Colorado's rhythm.
Yeah, I like what you said there because Colorado's starting a true freshman walk-on at center right now in Cash Cleveland. He came from IMG Academy too. And I think that Utah did a really good job playing chess with Shedeur yesterday. It was the first time that I've seen him like take an extra second to make sure that what he was seeing was right, because Utah threw a ton of different looks. Kansas will see that on tape, and Kansas is going to try and a lot of pre-snap shifting, really trying to make him guess at what they're going to do. And they do have the 2 outside corners to do it. It'll be interesting to see what the game plan is for Colorado if they choose to attack the slot more. And again, I think it's all about their running game. If they can find some success on the ground, honestly, I'd be pretty surprised if Kansas gave them a really tough fight. But I think they've struggled with that, so I can't expect to see that on Saturday. I'm going to need to see them prove that they can get that back going. It was going for a little while and then it stopped. And I think we all know sometimes throughout the season, your weaknesses can show up at the most important times. And while Colorado has run the ball better, it's certainly not the strength of their team. So if they can't find a way to iron that out, then I definitely think we could be in for a shootout, because Grimm's a hell of a player. I think they're going to try and use him on probably attack Shiloh and attack Cameron Silman Craig a little bit. They got to find a way to get him in space. And the one thing Colorado does a ton is they play man coverage. And at some point, and they do it stubbornly so at times, to the point where teams have killed them with drags and crossers. So I'd expect to see Grimm just back and forth all day running between the 50s. And Skinner had a big game last night? Yeah. So,
Yep.
Look, guys, they just beat undefeated BYU. Colorado's not taking them for granted. And the Buffs offensively felt like they left a lot on the table yesterday. So Colorado will be locked in. I expect this to be a really fun one.
Same.
All right. We wrap this show up the same way we do every week. We look to the weekend ahead. Now, we just did that for a bit, but now I'm going to ask you all to pick the one game in the Big 12 this weekend that you think is absolutely must watch. And of course, you cannot pick the game with the team that you root for. It makes it far more fun and interesting. I will run through the schedule. Reminder, for some reason, they decided to schedule every game at 2:30 on Saturday because ESPN is trying to screw the Big 12. 2 o'clock on ESPN
Wow.
Plus, TCU hosting Arizona and Fort Worth. 2:30 ESPN Plus, Oklahoma State hosting Texas Tech. 2:30 on ESPN, Arizona State hosting BYU. 2:30 on Fox, Kansas hosting Colorado. And 2:30 on ESPNU, West Virginia, UCF. So notice I just said ESPN Plus, ESPN Plus, ESPN, ESPNU. 5 games kicking off the Big 12 between 2 and 2:30. Awesome
You
job,
know what?
everyone.
I did not notice that. That is an excellent point. To have Colorado and Kansas now it was on Fox and ESPN, but to have CU and Kansas and BYU and ASU running congruently sucks. That is a really good point you bring
Yes.
up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Phillip ranted about it for a good 10 minutes at the top of the show. So
yes.
No, that is excellent. I'm glad you brought that up.
I will say, though, that TCU and Oklahoma State share at least some of the blame because they have a lot to say about the start times when your game is on ESPN Plus. That's just something that they've allowed the Big 12 to do quite a bit. So
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
I don't care.
as in they get ESPN gets a lot of input from the home team when a game is broadcast on ESPN Plus about when they want to have the game. And they typically will stick with that for the most part, unless there's a compelling reason not to. And let's be honest, if it's on ESPN Plus, then it probably doesn't have a compelling reason that people are going to want to tune in at a specific time for it. So
that doesn't have anything to do with the two most important games of the weekend.
I agree.
The
But
Big
what I'm
12 being
saying
the
is
exact
having
same
4
kickoff.
games there are not entirely ESPN's fault, but it's definitely the 2 big games is, ESPN could have done something.
Only 3 of
Andy.
them. Only 3 of the
Andy.
games are their fault.
Yeah, exactly.
And, right. Only 3 of the 5. Because, West Virginia UCF couldn't have been at 11 o'clock, which would have made a ton of sense, just from a time zone wise. And we didn't just start the show by complaining about Desmond Howard.
No, not at all.
Arizona State and Kansas State. And
All right.
what's her name saying that I'm not. Okay. Sorry. The rest of the schedule for Saturday, because there's 3 more games we haven't mentioned yet. Houston, Baylor at 6 o'clock on FS1. Utah hosting Iowa State at 6:30 on Fox. And Kansas State hosting Cincinnati at 7 o'clock on ESPN2. That is the full slate. Allison, what's the game that you're like, everyone leave me alone, turn off all of the great music suggestions that I have? This is the
Yeah,
game
so
I'm watching.
I'm sure you guys probably talked about it at the beginning of the show, but I think the game with the most, there's 2 games with the most Big 12 championship implications. It's BYU, Arizona State, and Colorado KU. I will be watching BYU, Arizona State just because I think that's a very compelling game. I would honestly rather watch that game more than my own team, probably. I am very, very stressed about that situation, but Arizona and BYU are both very sneaky good teams that we did not see coming this year, and I really want to see how they match up with each other. Both of them are fascinating to me. Both fan bases are very interesting, and honestly, just really happy to be here. So interacting with them have been great too. But I will definitely have that on my big TV, and then I'll be putting KU Colorado on my smaller TV next to it.
Understandable.
Yeah, very, very understandable. Very understandable.
Well, I mean,
Andy,
I will be at the Colorado Kansas game. So I will be watching on the TV BYU Arizona State. But the other one that I would also kind of like to highlight is that Cincinnati Kansas State game, because it is one where you have a Kansas State team that is trying to kind of get things turned around to feel good about the end of their season and avoid, I mean, what can best be described right now as a fan mutiny on Twitter from getting worse. And a Cincinnati team that, as crazy as it sounds, this might be their best opportunity to get bowl eligibility with a Kansas State team that's struggling right now. I don't know. I mean, it sounds really weird to say it, but this is one where they could get bowl eligible against, and continue to kick a team that is struggling right now. It's intriguing at least to watch, and of course it helps that it's the last game of the day for the Big 12, so I'll get to watch it at the very end.
Well, say
Can't
Cincinnati
wait for
does
Scott to
play
text me about
TCU
that.
as their last game, and that one's at home. So kind
Yeah,
of want to
TCU
look
has
at.
been one of those teams that they do exactly the opposite of what you expect this year. Like, so yeah, I could say that I think Cincinnati is going to be really good in that one, and then TCU is going to come and beat them 51-2. Like, that's ridiculous
T-
that TCU's been this year.
Congratulations to TCU on becoming the new Dana Holgerson team without Dana Holgerson. Matt, what game do you
I
have
will
circled, sir?
also be in Kansas City for that game, so I'll be there, and definitely we'll all have eyes on BYU and ASU for sure. But I'll tell you this: there's a reason K-State is a 9-point favorite against Cincinnati, guys. I think they rickroll them this weekend.
They
So
should, yes.
Cincinnati is like a mini version of what Kansas State actually is. Like they're trying to be what Kansas State is. And that was one thing that I realized when Cincinnati came to Boulder. CU just really couldn't stop DJ Giddens. That guy he's an NFL back for sure. He's the best back that I've seen this year. I think a lot of people are overrating the running backs in the Big 12. DJ Giddens is the best, like far and away to me. Taj Brooks is good. He's not DJ Giddens. Kiner and Pryor, they're a good two-headed combo. He's not Giddens. And then, of course, I think this is a Kansas State team that gets better, like the next couple of years as Avery continues to grow a little bit and Dylan gets a little bit older and they start adding. I got tons of respect for Chris Kleeman in that program. They are, they do things the right way there. And so, I think that's they absolutely dominate. And how about Dave Aranda saving his season at Baylor? That one, when we saw Baylor, was a bit of a surprise to us, having to go to the guy they didn't expect to start at quarterback. So I felt like you got to give him a shout out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, based off of this conversation, the memes coming out of, Dr. Evil, Kansas State, and Mini Me, Cincinnati. So
it's what it feels like to me. It's what it felt like to me.
So you're asking me?
No, I'm sure that somebody who listens to the
Okay.
podcast will actually make it for us.
Enjoy.
I can think of two people that will probably get this far on the show and actually would make that for us. Also, Matt, careful. Besmirching Big 12 running backs is a good way to get a 10-12 ban.
I think I'll be all right. I think I'll live, guys.
We'd like to have you back. Look, we've said a lot about Colorado, Kansas, Arizona State, BYU. Those are the two biggest games. I want to go ahead and mention the other game involving the fourth team that is legitimately still in contention for the Big 12 title game based on the way tiebreakers work and who knows what happens on Saturday, and that is Iowa State traveling to Utah. And look, Utah is, I don't know, I think broken at this point with terrible quarterback play, too many injuries. I don't know. Utah is technically not eliminated from bowl contention at 4-6. They haven't won a game since they beat Oklahoma State at the start of Big 12 play. Like, it's not been good. Iowa State bounced back with a win over Cincinnati they needed last week, okay? After two really bad losses that kind of both came out of nowhere. They've got to go to Utah. I'd say it's an interesting spot for Iowa State, who, again, does not control their own destiny. All they can do is win out against Utah and Kansas State and hope that other teams help them out by pulling off upset wins. They're rooting for Arizona State and they're rooting for Colorado or for Kansas this weekend. I'll tell you that much. I am keeping an eye on Iowa State, Utah, because that game does still have Big 12 title game implications depending upon what Iowa State does the last 2 weeks.
The one last note that I will throw out there is the last time we had a highly rated team from the state of Utah going to Arizona State, it was a hell of a game to watch and very interesting to kind of see how Arizona State potentially pulled that one out. So, that's all the more reason that one is even more compelling just because of all the parallels we see. So,
Fun fact with Iowa State, they're 8-2 right now. Iowa State has never had a 10-win season in their program's history.
Correct.
If they
we are
win-
well aware.
Now listen, if they win against
Yes.
Utah this weekend, it's up to K-State to keep them from that 10-win streak.
A bowl would
It is.
be 10 wins. That's like not
Yeah.
10 wins ever, period, at all. Like not even with bowl
Indeed.
game.
I just don't want that pressure on me, personally. So keep an eye out. We're on 10
As
win
if-
watch right now.
As if Farmageddon didn't already have a lot of pressure upon it. Why not add try and prevent Iowa State from winning 10 games?
The
to it?
game,
That would,
yes, Farmageddon
that
still
would
has
be
huge
something.
implications for both teams, essentially in the same position at this point, but it's except we're both more angry now. That's the only difference, is that we're probably not going to make it, so we're more angry about it. We'll see how it goes. Weird stuff always
If
happens.
we could just, can we get snow for a second straight season? I think we would all.
No.
Allison's like, I'm not coming back on this show. Don't do that to me. Don't do me with that. I will actually be in Stillwater for OSU Texas Tech, and it's not because I'm like excited about the game. It's because I got $25 tickets, and I'm taking my two oldest girls to their first football game, and I would much rather take a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old to a football game where I don't actually have to like care what's going on, because there's no way they're going to, despite how excited they are. So considering it's a 2:30 kickoff, we'll probably still leave at halftime. I'm okay buying $25 tickets when I know OSU is out of bowl contention, to be like, whatever happens. We're going to go have a good time. And so I will be like scrolling constantly on BYU, Arizona State, and Colorado, Kansas while I'm at Stillwater in the stadium. Just like, I'm going to go get a drink. And really, I'm not. I'm just going to go stand in line for 3 times in a row so I can check the scores on the TVs in the stadium. So, yeah, it's going to be a fun Saturday. It's going to be a fun weekend. Oh, all right. Matt, thank you so much for hopping on with us tonight. You were awesome. Fantastic. Do me a favor, let everybody know where they can check out your work.
Right now on YouTube at Real Matt Smith, Matt with 1 T, and on all social media platforms at the moment. Just came off a big stint working at a big radio station here in Denver, and just in a bit of a transition right now as I figure out what's next. So yeah, I've been covering the Buffs for 12 years now. So it's a lot of fun, and certainly we'll see what happens on Saturday.
Alison, better late than never. Always a pleasure to have you on. It's been too long. I know that you do a lot of really. Alison's my new favorite. Like, I'm gonna go look at the band she just mentioned on social media, and I'm not a country music guy, but
Thank
Alison.
you. Yeah, that's a great compliment. Thank you.
Bravo. So, plug it all. Where can everybody check out what all you've been working on?
I do not really do anything media professionally, so I kind of just fly by the seat of my pants. But you can follow me on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it at Alison with 1L_Renner. And that's primarily where I post my stuff, different podcasts I'm going to be on that week, that month, music recommendations, different artists I support. So yeah, just find me there.
If you like good music, give Alison a follow. Just, you can ignore her Kansas State or whatever sports takes, but just get the music correct. I highly recommend him. That other voice you've heard throughout the show is, of course, Andy Metz, host the Rock Chalk.
No, it's all right. The Rock Chalk podcast.
I know that. I know it.
I love how the obvious word was the one word that you tripped up over, but it's great.
Yeah, look, we decorated the house this weekend.
Phillip, I will also say thank you so much for doing my preview episode for me for the game this weekend. So yeah, appreciate it.
You don't have to do that. You're welcome. Hey, you're welcome, sir. Okay, this is how I show thanks. Okay, it's a time of giving thanks. All right. We will be. Thank you to everybody. Thank you everyone who's listened today. We'll be back on Thursday to make picks for this weekend. Don't ask me who the guest picker is, because if you do, they won't show up. So I'm just going to keep it to myself. Y'all enjoy your week.
podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.